welcome to the November 8th, 2021 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using as our state and community continue to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials webpage. Looking ahead, tonight's regular meeting will include a public forum. Information about how to participate is available on the city's public webcast and meeting materials webpage. And as always, other avenues of communication with me and the City Council are available, including email and voicemail. So thank you all for spending this time with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the City Manager for the first item, the Sustainability Commission FY 2022 work plan.
Thank you, Mayor. I know from our most recent goal setting workshop settings, the council's been looking forward to having these kind of interactions with their boards and commissions. So I'm really excited tonight to have the Sustainability Commission here. We've been meeting with their leadership with some frequency, and I know they have a great work plan to talk about with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Samantha Roberts. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thanks for having us. So my name is Samantha Roberts, and I'm the staff liaison for the Sustainability Commission. I'm joined today by Mtima Richardson, who is our chair this year, and Laura Allen, who is our vice chair. And I'll get our slides going here momentarily, and then I'll pass it over to Mtima to get us started. Can you all see the slideshow okay? Awesome. Mtima, take it away.
Thank you, Samantha, for getting that set up. Like she said, I'm Mtima Richardson, this year's chair of the Eugene Sustainability Commission. And I would just like to thank City Council, the mayor, city manager, and everyone else at the city who's working hard to create a positive change, and especially when it comes to sustainability in the city's effort in the fight against climate change. So thank you. We are very excited today for our meeting objectives. Our first objective is to go over our work plan for fiscal year 22 and what our priorities are. And I hope you all appreciate where the commission is taking our work this year. Our second meeting objective will be presented by our vice chair, Laura Allen, and she'll go over what the commission's proposed timeline for this year is, which includes quarterly check-ins with the mayor and city manager. We find these check-ins very meaningful, and it's always great to talk with them and just get some input and advice and all that. And lastly, we'll open up for any discussions and questions before you hold a vote to approve our work plan. The commission is coming off of a very productive year from FY 21. It was driven by an ambitious work plan. We do want to continue this momentum, but also keep in mind that the limitations of City Council and the staff. This year, we aligned our priorities with what councilors and staff members are already working on. We are working closely with staff to be able to enhance the city's efforts in furthering the CAP 2.0 and sustainability practices. We split our work plan into two sections. The first one is areas for policy recommendations to council and further research and advocacy. There are 4 policy recommendations in our work plan, and not in any particular order. We have urban canopy, and this is where we'll explore key focus areas in urban forestry, and including best practices for increasing and maintaining canopy coverage, while also promoting equity in urban forestry for our local community. The second one that we have is resiliency and emergency preparedness. And this is where we'd like to research and explore opportunities to build community resilience and well-being through community-based resiliency hubs, hazard mitigation and emergency preparedness, and a comprehensive approach to wildlife preparedness, and also to promote connections with the city, the county, and also community partners. I'm really excited about that one. Third, we have offsets, researching benefits and disadvantages of using carbon offsets, and sequestrations to reach climate goals. And we also want to better understand the potential impact of carbon offsets on our local community and to research other opportunities for carbon offsets in Eugene. And lastly, we have waste management. And this is where we'll be researching policy options that continue to further Eugene's efforts towards waste reduction, and also explore ways to extend and enhance these efforts. On our second section of the work plan, which we called Furthering Research and Advocacy, there we have 3 areas: community education and outreach, momentum forward issues, which includes monitoring and pushing forward previous recommendations, monitoring climate action progress metrics, and also monitoring topical climate-related city efforts. And the third one is emerging areas of interest. This will allow commissioners to pursue or research unforeseen topics that may be presented by the mayor, the city manager, the city council, other commissioners, and even the public. And our outcomes for this work plan for this year is to provide at least 2 to 3 policy recommendations to City Council, and also to provide a forum for addressing public concerns related to sustainable policies and practices, and to provide input to City Council and City Manager on sustainability policies and practices that reflect community values. On our next slide, you will see 4 previous recommendations from FY21. This is an example of that section in our work plan called Momentum Forward Issues that I just mentioned. This is how we'll be keeping track of previous recommendations and where they are now. Example of these could include last year's recommendations, including the ones you see: air quality, fossil fuel risk bond, energy in buildings, and food security. You did see these in July when the Commission presented its FY21 annual report, so probably a little bit familiar. But these include air quality, where we had 5 proposals for the improvement in air quality, education, and policy landscape. We are excited to see that it'll be brought forth in the upcoming work session regarding how to fund climate work. So thanks for that. Next, you will see the fossil fuel risk bond. And we would like to say thank you to Councilor Zelinka for putting forth a work session poll for this. And it could also be included in a work session on climate work funding. Third, you will see energy in buildings. This is where we recommended an equitable reduction in natural gas use. And I would like to say thank you for addressing this policy in the past September work session. Thank you. And last, you'll see on the screen is the food security recommendation. And we look forward to seeing the progress of this recommendation and the possibility of it being a part of another work session, even the one about how to fund climate change. So these are examples of our past recommendations, and we look forward to seeing the outcomes of these work sessions and further discussions around our past recommendations. Thank you again. Now I'd like to pass it to Laura Allen, this year's Vice Chair of the Eugene Sustainability Commission.
Thanks, Matima. And if you could go to the next slide. I'm just going to go over the timeline for the year. This is our proposed fiscal year 2022 timeline. So we're in the fall. We are submitting this to you this evening, and we're starting our committee work. There's been some committees that have come through from before, and then some new ones have formed. The offset committee met today, and we have some new ones in the pipeline for our next meeting. And we did have our quarterly check-in, so that was great. Thank you so much for that. This winter, we're going to continue our committee work and continue the quarterly check-ins. And then going on into the spring, that's when we continue our committee work and we work on our annual report and recommendations. And again, have our check-in. So that's where we're going. And then we just want to open it up for any questions that you had or any comments.
Thank you so much. And I see that, that Claire has her hand raised, but I just wanted to take a moment to say how I appreciate the structure of this and the clarity of it. And we had a work session on waste management, and you're going to push us a little farther along in that conversation, and I really appreciate that. And the council is clearly very concerned about tree canopy and all of these discussions, fossil fuel bonds, all very, very timely for all of the work that council has before us. So thank you for contributing to that work. And with that, I will turn it over to Claire and then Emily.
Yeah, thank you. I echo the mayor's appreciation for the things that the commission wants to focus on. I think they are specific and needed areas of focus in terms of the Sustainability Commission being able to scope out, for example, on the urban canopy, to really scope out some options, ideas, policy recommendations, or funding, recommendations in terms of, where we're at, where we should be, and maybe creative proposals as well. So I really appreciate the specificity. I did want to grab a little credit from Councilor Zelinka. It was actually Councilor Groves and I who sponsored the work session poll on the risk bonds, and that poll did pass. So, yep. So we will have, the mayor and the city manager work on scheduling our work sessions once they are approved. So we hope to see that on the calendar, maybe starting in January or February. I'm not sure what the timing will be, but and then I had made a commitment at a prior meeting that I'm interested in a work session on those 5 air quality recommendations. And I know other counselors are too. So, I might not get to it before another counselor does, but that's on my little relatively long list of work session polls that I'd like to put out. So really appreciate your work, really appreciate all the commissioners helping us stay focused on things that are going to help us move us towards the goals that we're seeking in terms of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and then Alan.
Thank you. Thanks for another great report. I really like working with the Sustainability Commission, and I was there when they planned this work plan, and I was very impressed with the care they took and the many great ideas they had and the willingness to refine them down to a more manageable and doable plan. So I urge us to approve it. I'm looking forward to working with them to learn more and put the things they've already showed us into action. So thank you to the commission very much.
Thank you, Alan, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the good work plan. I think it's the right areas of focus, especially the canopy stuff. I had the opportunity with the mayor and Emily to actually go climb up some really tall trees, about 170 feet or something like that we went up to. And you can see the entire canopy, which is impressive until you realize that we're losing canopy every year. And so working on that area, I think is important for climate change and quality of life issues. I wanted to comment on offsets a little bit. I think they kind of get a bad rap. Offsets, if done right with proper safeguards and following proper protocols, result in greenhouse gas emission reductions, just like direct actions do. Except it's a different player that achieves the greenhouse gas reduction. So for me, the analogy is that when EWEB went out to go get energy efficiency, they didn't get energy efficiency in their shop. They went to all of our houses and put in new windows and insulation and water heaters and things like that reduced our energy consumption. Therefore, they bought an energy efficiency offset. We did it. They got result. The result was the same. We got less energy use. So good offsets take a lot of work. They have to adhere to the protocols which are established, and so they actually have a cost associated with them. And so and that cost is pretty much the same for small ones as it is for big offset projects. So the smaller offset projects cost more and are more difficult to do. And therein lies the problem we have with establishing them at the Eugene level, which is that it not only costs more, but we have a lot of work to do to create a local offset. But I think it would be, I hope what the Sustainability Commission is going to do is to actually look at how we can do local offsets, make them cost effective. Because to me, having, if we're gonna buy offsets, let's stimulate our own economy with the actions that we're gonna take and our own reductions in the citizens of Eugene and the businesses in Eugene to reduce greenhouse gases as opposed to doing it someplace else. I know that costs more, and that's probably an okay thing for Eugene to do. And maybe we could look at confining it to Eugene or bigger Lane County or bigger Oregon. But I think looking at it from that scalability and giving the council back a sense of how that works and whether or not those are feasible from a cost and from an action standpoint would be a really valuable tool for us to have and really valuable input from the Sustainability Commission. And I did vote for the risk bonds, by the way.
Thank you, Matt, and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chair Richardson and Vice Chair Allen, Fatima, and Laura, and Samantha for the work plan and the Sustainability Commission update. Like my colleagues, I am applauding the specificity while also welcoming the flexibility around emerging areas of interest in particular. For example, if a counselor brought up through one of the committees they serve on, let's just say the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency, an issue around gas-powered leaf blowers, and then brought that issue to the Sustainability Commission, I certainly would consider that an emerging area of interest, but not so subtle emerging area of interest. I also want to get behind the mayor and Councillor Syret and Councillor Zelenka's and Councillor Semple's support to expand our dwindling tree canopy coverage in the urban forest. And we're hovering around 21% and really should be closer to 30%. And so anything that council can do to incent and advance education around the issue, the better. I look forward to being a helpful partner in that regard. And finally, just a semantics note. I often hear, and this is an anecdotal observation, Mayor, I will often hear colleagues who are serving as chair or president of a committee, by and large, this is an observation when women are in leadership, they're referred to, or they'll refer to themselves as, I'm chair for this year. Matima, you're chair. Laura, you're vice chair. So I don't ever want to qualify it as your chair for this year. You're chair of the Sustainability Commission, and I look forward to being a helpful partner as how we could advance our shared values. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Jennifer, and then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, thank you, Matima and Laura and Samantha too for coming tonight. I also want to add praise for how you set up the plan. It's really, I really also like the connections that you made to council policy. But I'm just out of curiosity, have a question. So you guys mentioned you were adding more committees. Is that so that you have a committee for each of your main topics, or how do you guys plan to work that?
I could answer that if Matima, there you are. The commissioners make a committee proposal. So currently there isn't one about waste yet, though that is a priority. So they kind of come not all at once. It's a little bit more organic.
Okay, I was just curious and wanted to know. Since my appointee is here tonight, I would also say that I feel bad that I do not check in very often, and I plan on doing that more in the future. So, but I'm really glad to hear you guys have quarterly meetings and with our mayor and city manager. I think that's great to keep those touch points and keep all on the same page. And I think you guys are doing awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Matima, Laura, and Samantha. I really appreciate the report. I don't want to repeat everything my colleagues have said, but I share their appreciation for your work and applaud what you have done. I do want to emphasize one point that Councilor Zelenka made that I really believe in, and that is for offsets, trying to keep that money and the projects local wherever we can so that we better our game and not just somebody else's, even though it does contribute to the overall good, I understand, but I would just like to really see us try and dig in and stay local where we can. I too want to emphasize the tree canopy issue. And I would ask that not only do we try to expand our tree canopy, but we give priority to the locations where it does the most good. And that is shading hardscapes, our streets, our sidewalks. It's our waterways, our streams, our ponds, things that help actually have more, create more good and help us move closer to the goals with even, fewer trees than what it would take to achieve the same outcome in somebody's backyard, for example. Not that I'm against that too. I mean, wherever we can expand the canopy, that's great. I just would like to see us put an emphasis on those areas where they do the most good, because we have a dearth in a number of areas. And I have some ideas that when the time is right around middle housing, I look forward to talking about how we can increase with new development, more tree space on our streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we have the motion to approve, I just want to add, sort of piggyback on those comments from Randy and from Alan. One of the things that we wonder about is, I know that our urban foresters have a thoughtful plan about where they put trees and how they're planting trees. I think what I'm hearing is interest in hearing from the Sustainability Commission about a sort of a tree bank. And I am wondering if there's a connection here between our need for local offsets and if there's a possibility to have a local offset. So as Randy is alluding, as we put in more middle housing and we lose some trees, can we have an offset that replaces those trees maybe where there's more of a desert, some parts of Bethel certainly that really are short on trees. So kind of interested in that relationship. And I am understanding what limited I know about this is part of the challenge is just the metrics. It's just measuring what's enough. How do you balance out those offsets? But that it would be really interesting if we did sort of two things at once. And so really appreciate your work on that. And with that, I think, Jennifer, we're ready for a motion.
Right. Sorry, I got my papers out of order. Here we go. I move to approve the FY22 Sustainability Commission Work Plan.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's it. That's a unanimous support. Thank you very, very much, Matima and Laura, both for the work that you're doing and for your leadership and for presenting it so clearly to us tonight. Thank you so much. And with that, we can move on to our second item of business, the 2020 Census and Ward Population Update. Manager?
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just turn it over to Jason Dedrick.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jason Dedrick, Policy Analyst in the City Manager's Office. I'm here tonight to provide you with an update on the Census and Ward Boundary project. So I'm going to share my screen with you for a presentation. Okay, is that looking good? Great. All right, so, okay. All right, so give you a quick sense of where we're going in the presentation. I'll review a few revisions to the data that have occurred since we last presented to you in September. I'll also quickly refresh you on the two boundary scenarios. provide you an update on the community feedback that we've received over the last month, and then a reminder of our next steps in that tonight we're hoping to receive direction from you on a final set of boundaries to then go ahead and develop the ordinance and the final map for approval in December. So just a quick recap on the background of this project. Purpose is to ensure wards have approximately equal representation, i.e. as close to equal population as we can get. This occurs every 10 years. Traditionally has been based on US Census data. We do know that this year boundary changes are necessary based on the data that we've received. However, they aren't significant changes. They are relatively incremental in terms of the adjustments necessary. You did provide us guidance earlier this year on the criteria to use for creating those new boundary scenarios. Staff then created 2 scenarios. You reviewed those at your work session in September and directed staff to do engagement with the community on those 2 scenarios. Finally, just a quick update that we have been tracking the work that's been happening at the state level on legislative districts, as well as the county and their commission districts. Always looking to see if there are any ways that we may be able to align district boundaries in a way to make it more efficient. We have not found any subtle changes that we could make to our boundaries that would simplify that in any way and still adhere to the criteria that you've given us. So just wanted to let you know that we have been coordinating with those efforts as well. So a quick update on some data revisions. So since the last time that we presented to you, we have been working more on our sort of quality assurance work to check and review the census data. We typically have a little more time to do this than we did this year because of the delay in the census data. So we brought you scenarios at the front end of when we were doing that QA quality assurance work. What we did find was that there were some addresses out in the River Road, Santa Clara area that had been inadvertently included inside the city population count when in effect they are unannexed properties and should not be included. And so that was about 278 individuals. And so the total population for Eugene, you'll see, is reduced by about 280 individuals since we last reported to you. That's mostly coming out of Ward 5 and Ward 7. So we have adjusted the data in the scenarios appropriately for that. It has made some subtle changes, but not anything too significant. And I'll talk to you more about that. One other piece of information is that also as part of our quality assurance, we are monitoring any changes that may have occurred to actual census block boundaries. So our wards are arranged sort of at the smallest level that the census does, which is what's called a census block. And the census is constantly reviewing those to see if they want to change the shape of any blocks. If those happen inside of our wards, we tend to not notice them. If they happen on the edge of a ward, then it ends up having an impact. And so there is an area that has been included in our data all along, but we want to draw your attention to, which is that there are about 41 addresses that are going to move from Ward 1 to Ward 8 because the Census Bureau changed one of the block boundaries. So they used to have a block that was divided by our ward boundary, and now they've changed that. So again, this has been included in your data all along this year, but it's just a note that those 41 addresses will move from Ward 1 to Ward 8. So here is the revised population data. Total population of Eugene within the city limits, 176,667. Divide that by 8. You're looking at a target population in each of the wards of 22,083. So again, as close as we could get to that in all of our wards would be ideal. You can see here the updated difference from target, i.e. how far each ward is from that 22,083 population. The biggest change to this table since September is that Ward 7 was 9% over that target and is now down to 8.4%. So here's just an updated look at where those percentage differences from target are as they're arranged around the city. You'll recall that we use this to guide our development of scenarios. So no update here other than to share that we've updated this map with those new numbers. So a quick recap of scenario 1. So as you may recall, looking at first at North Eugene, we needed to move a set of population from Ward 5 to Ward 4. So that the area in the red circle is how we accomplish that under this scenario. This area is sort of bounded by major arterial roads, which made sense given one criteria. It's not quite as contiguous to Ward 4. So that is where that change is under scenario 1. Under this scenario, both sections of Ward 7 move into Ward 6 and Ward 8. There's a small change moving from Ward 3 to Ward 1. You'll remember that Ward 3 needs to shrink. And then also a section of Ward 3 that is moving into Ward 2. And so that is what the changes were under scenario 1. You can see in the table on the right there what the percentage difference for each ward is from that target population. Our total difference between our smallest and largest ward under this scenario is 2%. So that's a little higher than what we had reported to you in September. However, it's still well within the 3% guideline that you established for staff. And then looking at scenario 2, the changes here. So the movement from Ward 5 to Ward 4 is a little further to the east and north. This area is a little more contiguous to Ward 4 in terms of that criteria, but not as much bounded by major arterials. It's a little more neighborhood streets. The changes to Ward 6 and Ward 7 are the same as under scenario 1. Also, the move from Ward 3 to Ward 1 is the same. And the change regarding Ward 3 and Ward 2 has a little more of an east-west orientation than a north-south orientation. And so you can see on the right, the table there, how this scenario does performance-wise against the target. Our total difference between our smallest and largest wards are 2.3%. Again, a little higher than what we reported in September with that change in the data, but still within that 3% target. The biggest change that one would potentially make to account for those changes in Ward 7 that I talked about, those 278 individuals, would be to make changes out in that Ward 6, 7, 8 area. Staff did take a look to see if we could get just a little closer to 0. However, we did not see a way to do that and still be consistent with the criteria and not sort of create shapes that were odd looking, I guess, to say it as easily as I can. We also heard from the survey very few comments on the 6, 7, 8 changes, and that people actually really liked those areas. So that made us a little more hesitant to make any changes to that. So we did do community engagement over the last month or so. That included presentations, primarily to the Neighborhood Leaders Council. We did offer to present to individual neighborhood associations, as well as to several other stakeholder groups in town, but no one took us up on that offer aside from Neighborhood Leaders Council. We did have the online survey. We had about 105 responses to that. So that gave us a lot of good data and good comments from the community. And then we did invite individuals to present formal testimony at either the September or October public forums. However, we did not receive any formal testimony there. So I will review the survey results for you. So one of the key questions in the survey was to ask respondents which scenario they preferred. And so we have 102 respondents to this question. As you can see, the most respondents preferred scenario 2, followed by preferring both scenarios. And then in green there, you can see about 19% preferring scenario 1. And so kind of you look at this, step back a bit and look at it, the number of respondents, the percentage of respondents who feel that either 1 or 2 or both of the scenarios are sufficient is up around 70–75%. So what that means is a lot of community members, a lot of respondents to the survey feel that one of the 2 scenarios is adequate. We did, as you can see here, have about 25% of respondents say that neither of the scenarios worked for them. Talk a little bit about more this in a few minutes, but we believe that this is based on the comments, based on the fact that some respondents are interested in more wholesale changes to the ward boundaries rather than the incremental approach that was taken this year. So we also asked to what extent respondents felt that scenario 1 met the criteria that you laid out for staff. What matters here, what I'm going to talk about, are the areas that are green and orange, because those are green is that they definitely agree, and orange is that they somewhat agree. So if you look at the magnitude of those 2 together, and so the top bar there is whether the wards are compact and contiguous, followed by whether we consider geographic features. The third one is neighborhood features and association boundaries. And then the bottom one is, does it support the incremental approach? And for the first, second, and fourth, you can see that almost 70% or more of respondents felt that the scenario meets those three criteria. Only about 48% of respondents felt that scenario 1 met the neighborhood criteria. This was likely driven in large part by comments that we received from the Amazon neighborhood regarding the changes to Ward 2 and Ward 3. So we asked a similar question about scenario 2. Again, you can see that there was pretty broad agreement that the criteria around being compact and contiguous and geographic features and an incremental approach were met by scenario 2. A very slightly higher percentage of respondents felt that this scenario met the neighborhood features criteria a little better. It was 56% under this scenario, 48% under scenario 1. So not really a statistically significant difference, but a small difference. And then looking at where our respondents live in terms of by ward, you can see that this is 105 respondents on this one. The most respondents were from Ward 2, followed by Ward 3, and then Ward 7. We did have respondents from all of our wards, which was great. So I mentioned that we did also ask for sort of open-ended comments on the scenarios. So one of the things we asked was what they liked about each scenario. So what they liked about scenario 1 was that it was simple, that it met the criteria, and that they liked the changes out in Ward 6, 7, and 8 in that area. What they would like to change about scenario 1 is that they don't like the Ward 4, 5 changes and that they don't like the Ward 2, 3 changes. So the number of respondents sharing these comments was relatively small, although it's not surprising that since that's where the most significant changes were occurring, that is where people were wanting to make a change. So a similar question for scenario 2, what did respondents like? They liked that it was simple. A few respondents liked the 2, 3 changes better. A few liked the Ward 4, 5 changes better under scenario 2. However, what folks would want to change, there was a different set of folks who didn't like the Ward 2, 3 changes in scenario 2 and preferred the changes in scenario 1. So as expected, differing views on each of the scenarios based on sort of personal preference. We also did receive a lot of general comments around the survey. So this was either when we asked, what else would you like to tell us about ward boundaries, or even within the comments about what folks don't like about scenario 1. Often it rose up to sort of general comments about ward boundaries in general. So I wanted to cover those for just a minute. One of the more prominent responses was around consideration of renters. So respondents were saying that ward boundaries should be drawn or redrawn in consideration of where renters are located within the city. And so we have some updated data based on the census that tells us that about 52% of Eugenians are renters. Some rough mapping of where those renters are located shows that they are spread out sort of all around the city, and that most wards have a significant portion of renters. It is very difficult to map renters in the city based on census data because they collect that data at what's called the block group level, which is one level higher than our block level. So those areas cross ward boundaries, they cross the city limits. So it makes it really hard to get down to exact percentages by ward. So that makes consideration of renters a little bit difficult. We also did hear that wards should have consideration of more communities of interest. So for example, income should be considered. Hearing from folks that areas with higher income should be grouped in a ward, or lower income should all be grouped in a ward. Homelessness should be considered, travel patterns should be considered, i.e. where people shop or work, might guide where ward boundaries should be drawn. We also heard that respondents feeling like a new ward is needed in Eugene, also hearing that maybe we should have a single ward for all of downtown, but we also heard that maybe every ward should touch downtown. We also heard that maybe there should be a single ward for the River Road, Santa Clara area. And finally, that there should be better alignment between ward boundaries and neighborhood boundaries. So most of these criteria are ones or comments are around criteria that fall outside of the criteria that you provided the staff to use. And so one thing that we're going to be doing is documenting all of this information, putting it in a file so that the folks that pick up this work 10 years from now will be able to perhaps start a conversation earlier with council to say, are you interested in more broad scale changes to ward boundaries? And would you like to consider some of these other things that weren't official criteria this year? We want to talk for a minute about the neighborhood boundaries. So this slide shows a map of our current neighborhood boundaries. So the blue lines are the neighborhoods, the colors are the wards. And so just to say that of 23 neighborhood associations that we currently have, 13 of them are represented by more than one ward. And so one of the comments we were hearing was neighborhood associations should only be represented by one ward or shouldn't be divided between multiple wards. However, it is something that 13 of our neighborhood associations already have is representation by more than one ward, and actually 6 have representation by 3 wards. So it is somewhat difficult to consider making ward boundary changes for just one neighborhood because it would have a ripple effect throughout the system. So while ward boundaries are one way to make that change, changing neighborhood association boundaries is also another way to get that alignment. So ward boundaries are not the only way to affect that change. So just to recap the timeline here, you recall we started off in February, providing you an update, giving you an opportunity to weigh in on your general thoughts. We worked on the criteria earlier this year. We received the census data late in August. We brought you scenarios in September. You directed us to do community engagement in October. And then here we are in November, getting you to direct staff on the final ordinance and map. In terms of next steps, what we are hoping again is that tonight you're directing us on to prepare the ordinance and the final map. That there would be a hearing then on that final ward boundaries on December 13th, followed by action at some point after that. And as a reminder, one of the things we're really gearing around here is that Lane County has expressed their desire that that the county commission boundaries, as well as the city council ward boundaries, be finalized by the end of the year. And this is because the county elections office then has to go and change all the precinct boundaries, and they have to do that in time to prepare the ballot and all the materials for the May primary. And so because of the delay in census data this year, it's really shortened that timeline for county elections. And that's the reason why we're really trying to hit that end of December timeline. So that is it in terms of my presentation, and the rest of the time can be for questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation, and I actually really appreciated the council packet with the whole list of comments, which was also very, very interesting and very clear. So, all right, we have a little lineup, Randy and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jason and staff, for the work on this. And I do recognize this is a lot of work. My concern is the same it's been all along, that I feel like the process is still being rushed. And with this only coming up once every 10 years, I personally would like to see a more thoughtful look where we dive in a little bit deeper. I recognize I'm probably still in a minority on this issue, but I feel strongly enough about it that I at least want to bring it up again. I do think we should be taking into account renters. I do think we should be taking into account the business community, even though they are not voters, or they don't vote by where their business is, I should say, or where they work. But it just feels like, again, we're just rushing this, and I can just see this play out 10 years from now, where we'll be under timelines again, and we'll still be just trying to find the most expedient way to move forward, which may not be the best way. The question I do have is there anything that precludes us from looking at this more frequently than 10 years?
We would need to research that a little bit more and get back to you, because that language is contained in our code, in our charter. And I think we want to take just a little more time to make sure we can get you a solid answer on when we can revisit. Obviously, we traditionally do it every 10 years, but I think we want to be 100% sure on what is that possibility in terms of not doing that. So we can get back to you pretty quickly with an answer on that, but I don't think that we can provide a solid answer on that tonight.
Okay, that's fair enough. Another question is, I recognize the county wants this to be done by the end of the year. Are we under any legal obligation to have it completed by the end of the year?
We do not have anything in our process that specifies an end date. The closest thing that there might be would simply be that with the candidate filing period ending in early March, obviously candidates would need to know what ward they were in. So that's sort of would be the last sort of default deadline, I guess, per se, but nothing specific in our code that says we must finish it by a certain date.
Could we do the work because of that and then have a later implementation date? For example, we go ahead and do whatever we're going to do now, but, and this is kind of a spinoff on the first question I asked. So could we have this set, be working on it now and then implement it later? And then we already have in the charter what happens if somebody is redistricted out of their ward, they get to finish their term.
That is correct. And in terms of that, the possible moving someone out of their ward, they would still finish their term. And we had this conversation at a previous work session, and I believe where things ended up was that it is sort of under the council's purview to consider not adjusting the ward boundaries now, should you choose not to, again, because our charter or code doesn't necessarily specify that it occur now.
Thank you. I think I'll stop for now, but I may come back for a second round depending on what I hear from my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer and then Mike.
Thanks, Mayor. So I think Randy asked all my questions. I was under the mistaken impression that there was some kind of statutory situation that we had to have this done before the election in May. And apparently I sorry, Jason, I am having email trouble. So I got your first email letting me know you would send me a more detailed email, but I didn't get the more detailed email. So if this was in there, I apologize. But so my understanding from all of Randy's questions are, we could do this after the May election if we chose to.
I believe that is correct. I'm going to give the city attorney a moment to pop in to see if she has anything else she wants to add. I don't want to put you on the spot too much with that, but I also don't want to speak further than what I'm able to speak either.
Yeah, I'm not sure when you say by the May election, when you're talking about
whatever the next, I mean, we're trying to get all this done in time for an election. Could we just not and then wait till the election is over and then do something? So we'd still only be doing it once every 10 years. We just wouldn't be doing it right now.
If we're able to conclude that we're still have that the differentiation between the populations is not significant enough that you are creating an unequal vote. I mean, that is entirely what the purpose of redistricting is. And there's considerably more direction around state and federal and local. We turn to that to look, but everything that we're doing when it comes to drawing boundaries, ward boundaries, is one person, one vote. Everybody's vote has the same value. So if the percentages are close enough that you're not risking that, then yes. But that is truly what you're doing. And so then the deadlines are based on, if you're going to do it, how to not do it in a disruptive way. If that makes sense.
It does. I appreciate it. I don't actually know what the answer is, but I do have some of the same concerns that Randy does, that waiting a whole another 10 years feels like pushing it down the road. But I am curious to hear what all my colleagues who have their hands up have to say. My only other thing was, I think we're gonna have to, we've been doing a lot better on engagement. I think our most recent attempts to do engagement on different issues have been incredibly more equitable and inclusive. And so when I see a process like this, where it's self-selected survey with low numbers, and I get that engagement is hard, it takes time and it takes money. I think it's just something we need to think about down the road, about how valuable this type of work, this type of input is when the numbers are so low and the way we're collecting it is not very inclusive, and how we're going to use it and how much weight we're going to give to it and how much time. I mean, we spent a lot of time in this meeting talking about 105 people who self-selected to take a survey. So I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying I think it's something we need to grapple with. And I just thought I'd bring it up. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and then Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to show absolute respect to my friends who've spoken already, and I certainly understand the points Randy brought up and can agree with the importance of those points. I guess I would say, though, that in the years I have been a part of council work on this level, and my recollection of years well before I was on council of what occurs with redrawing these lines, it used to be very much like what you see today at the county, at the state, at the federal level, in Oregon redistricting. Lawsuits, huge controversy, very strange maps. And personally, Jason, I just want to say thank you. I think that your strategy for the grouping of nearby wards and the minor adjustments to each created a very uncontroversial opportunity for us to uphold the law and do what we should do and do it well. I'm happy that we don't have big fights over this in the city. There was a time when we did. There was a time when the difference between wards 4 and wards 3 boundaries were fought over very, very hard. And, ward 7 and ward 5 and ward 7 and ward 6. And those were some pretty acrimonious times 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I like the fact that I think our council represents different interests and different neighborhoods of our community well, I think. And so for me, this seems like a good set of selections. I don't have strong feelings about either scenario 1 or scenario 2. Could live with either one. I think I prefer the second option, but I think the fact that they are minor alterations is a good thing because it does not create controversy or strong feelings and more fights in our community. So thank you, sir. Thank you, Jason, for the hard work.
Thank you, Claire, and then Emily. Claire, you're still muted.
I hit the button and then it muted again. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jason, for the presentation. So, yeah, I tend to agree with Mike's comments. This council approved criteria for this project, and that's listed on the first page of our AIS. And staff has fulfilled that charge, not to make huge changes to the ward boundaries, dramatic shifts in where those lines are. I can see some quibbling here and there, but we also have to fulfill the numeric, as the city attorney pointed out, the numeric obligation to ensure that the wards are relatively evenly even in terms of population. And right now we have a couple of wards, Ward 3 and Ward 7, that have an outsized population relative to other wards. We've got Ward 8 that's at negative 4.8 and Ward 2 that's at negative 6.5. So those are actual things that we are obligated to respond to. And I believe, like Councillor Clark, both scenarios are responding to that need to make sure that we make the shifts so that our population is even as much as possible and fulfilling the criteria that we all voted and agreed to. So I'm not sure what problems we're trying to solve by the idea of delay or extending the process or even revisiting it in a couple of years. I did read the comments, and I see that there was. Sorry, it's very sensitive. To bring attention to renters and renters representation. I'm not sure how ward boundaries prevent renters from running for city council. Matt Keating did it. He got elected. I was a renter in this community for 14 years when I first moved here. Now that was many years ago and not necessarily the current pressures, but just because I'm not a current renter doesn't mean I don't understand the dynamics of being a renter. So I would actually like a second round, Mayor, because I have more thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, Emily and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jason, for all this work. I agree kind of with everybody. You did follow the criteria that we put forward, and that's important, and thank you for that. It's maybe unfortunate that we didn't think of these other criteria back then when it would have been more appropriate. I am concerned about the feeling brought forth that the renters aren't represented. I also think you don't have to be a renter right now. I was a renter for 16 plus years, and I talk to people, I see what's going on. It's worse than when I was a renter. So I'm not quite sure what the wards would look like to do this, and it'll be a whole lot of work to figure this out. It's very complicated. I'm not against looking at it because I do want to be responsive and feel that we're paying attention to where people feel they should be grouped together. But we can't do it in time for this. So the big question is, which we can't get an answer today, and that's okay, is how soon could we look at it again? And if we wanted to, then we'd need a plan with more public outreach and some map wizards. So I hear the need for a different representation. I also know that this is reality and what we asked for, and we have to get those numbers evened out. So we can't say, well, we'll just keep it the way it is now and then change it after we study it. We have to change something now. As far as 1 and 2, it doesn't change in my ward at all. And I think it would be presumptuous for me to put in an opinion of how those neighborhoods that are affected should be grouped. So I appreciate everybody's comments. And as always, I wish life could be just a little bit different, but this is what we're working with. I hear you, and I think we need to go forward. Just be interested to see if we can come back to it sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and then Matt. Thank you, Mayor. Mike was a renter when he ran 3 times as well. This delay is caused by the previous administration screwing this up and caused this delay. Now we're kind of put in this bind of having to, that was for you, Mike, having to fix this now in time for the next election, and kind of against the wall on that. I don't think that the ward system or the ward allocations right now is very broken, and therefore the tweaks, as Mike said, I don't think it's very controversial what we're ended up doing here. I'm not hearing a lot about it. I agree with what Mike said. So thank you, Jason, for following all of that. As to waiting and doing nothing, I think at this point, having a swing of 20 to 24,000 in different wards is a pretty big swing, and that's too much for me. So waiting is not really a good option. I think that violates the principle of one person, one vote too much for me. And as far as renters, Jason, I thought you did some analysis. Aren't renters scattered throughout the entire city? There isn't any ward that has all the renters in it or has no renters in it.
That is correct. We did run this data based on the new census data and found that renters were spread throughout the entire city. Most of the wards have large areas where up to 50% or more of those areas are renters. As I mentioned, it makes it really difficult to get exact data. This is something that's come up through Envision Eugene, getting better monitoring data on renters versus homeowners. So I think we can eventually get to that more specific data. Census data just gives us a general look. But yeah, very much spread out.
Right, and the fact that over half of 51% of Eugenians are renters. I mean, we're all over the place. I'm not sure that that's a really good criteria. The shifts between the wards are also independent of each other, correct, Jason? They don't really matter. 2, 3 is independent from 4, 5, etc. So you can mix match, right?
That is correct. Yeah. If you, I think the biggest concern would be making changes that would be different than what the community has reviewed. But if a piece of scenario 1 wants to be combined with a piece of scenario 2, yes, I think those could be treated independently.
Right. And for that matter, I don't really have a strong opinion about shifts in other wards where it involves 2 other counselors. They know that better than I do. So I kind of rely on their preference for that. For me, both scenario 1 and 2 meet the criteria for the shift from 3 to 2. But for me, the big difference is in scenario 1, only one of the neighborhood associations gets split in half, gets split up, Amazon. And in scenario 2, 2 neighborhood associations get split up. So my preference is not to split up 2 neighborhood associations, just have that split for 1. And so my preference for the 3-2 split is a scenario 1. As far as the survey are concerned, I agree with Jennifer's comments on that. This is 102 people self-selected out of 177,000 people in Eugene. I'm not sure how much weight we should put on that. In individual wards, it's less than 20. That's 0.001% of the wards expressing their opinion. So I'm not exactly sure. That's 1/1000th of a percent. I'm not sure how much impact that should have, given what a small survey that is. So all in all, from my perspective, 2, 3 scenario 1 works the best for me.
Thank you. Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with Councilor Zelenka's sentiments, and not just for the reasons that the councilor stated, but also just anecdotally. Looking for rentals, as Beck and I have feverishly this past year, and finally settled on one we love right here in South Eugene. Anecdotally, option 1 of the 2 scenarios in front of us adds a lot more economic diversity to Ward 2 than scenario 2, which literally takes in the golf course. As much as I love Laurelwood, as much as I love playing Laurelwood and throwing parties at Laurelwood, pre-COVID and post-COVID, option 1 seems to have, just anecdotally, a lot more, like I said, economic diversity and renters. And I recognize that one doesn't have to necessarily rent, as I do, in order to advocate for renters. So I'm encouraged to hear a great deal amount of enthusiasm around getting behind what I consider to be a critical community of economic interest that are renters. Jason, I'm going to ask you please to pull up the map, if you could, that Councilor Zelenka alluded to, that shows where renters are in our community, if you could. And I'm going to give you a second to do that, and just make it clear to colleagues that fundamentally I consider ward boundaries at the municipal level, county commission boundaries, even legislative district lines, to fundamentally benefit landowners. It's just pure and simple. Renters tend to move around a lot and be more transient in nature. And I think it lends itself 21 years into the 21st century, over the next decade, for the next council that's taking this issue on. I strongly encourage future councilors to consider including 1 or more at-large members to allow for exploring options that allow for the most diverse array of voices to be at the table. That being said, the maps in front of us adhered to the guidelines that council set out, which is to do the least amount of shuffling, if you will. I'm paraphrasing. Maintained counselors in their ward. We had a goal of doing this by the end of the year, even though filing for new seats already started in September. And if you look at the maps, actually, it's not just anecdotal. I can see the addition that Ward 2 will get into Ward 3 at the south end of your map, right around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Option 1 would put more renters in Ward 2, which is critical, as opposed to if it was the east-west scenario or west to east scenario encompassing Laurelwood Golf Course. Mayor, I'm ready to support map 1 tonight.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of counselors for the second round, but I just want to chime in for a minute and kind of address the question of the 10-year timeline and suggest to all of you that within the next few months, you are going to confirm code changes related to HB 2001, which is going to create a lot more housing. You have a number of priorities around building housing along corridors. We are a growing community. The population numbers are going to grow in the next 10 years, and that's going to give you a lot more information. And so rather than thinking that you should make changes sooner than 10 years, I think the 10-year boundary is a good one because there will be a lot of change, and it makes more sense to be really adjusting those boundaries when you have seen the impact of that growth and the other decisions you have made around land use. So that's just my 2 cents around hurrying that process. And with that, I have first Claire and then Mike for second round.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So yeah, and I appreciate the critique about the small sample of the survey. And I guess I view it, rather than trying to take a statistically valid poll and lean all of our decisions on that, as a sampling of views throughout the community. You know, and there were people from all the wards who took the survey. So, I mean, I think one has to take the survey in light of, you know, Councilor Ye's critique, and give it as much weight as that. But I did find some of the comments interesting, and I just thought for some levity, I would share a couple of them, one at all of our expense, except Councilor Keating, apparently. So I don't know which friend of this is of yours, Councilor Keating, but someone wrote, we really need to overhaul everyone on city council except Matt Keating. He seems legit.
Well, I took the survey, Councilor, and that was not my comment.
And then the other comment is at my expense. I would make north of First Street from Skinner's Butte to River Road, Ward 5. We're tired of the socio-political crap of Ward 7. So these are, yeah, this is good input for all of us to take, even though it's not necessarily pertinent to where the ward boundaries might end up. On a more serious note, you know, I do actually feel a responsibility to provide certainty around these maps, and not, I just really would have to be convinced that taking more time would provide us with greater insight to come to a different decision. And my gut is telling me that is not going to happen. So I'm fine with supporting scenario 1 to move forward to a public hearing. We can hear from more folks at that time. And if we really feel like, oh my goodness, this is, you know, this input is really throwing into doubt this map, then we could reconvene and continue the process from there.
Okay, thank you. Mike and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. The statute reads that our obligation is to not separate communities of common interest. I've always thought that was an interesting choice of words as to what a community of common interest is. And I suppose that's one of those, you know, in the eye of the beholder things. But with regard to the comments, I think Alan made some, and I don't know, certainly others did as well, about whether or not neighborhood associations were clustered in one ward or split into two. It's always been an interesting question to me whether or not a neighborhood association benefits from the representation of 2 counselors on council, or 3 in some cases, or whether or not they benefit more from just 1 counselor representing that neighborhood association. My personal point of view is it probably benefits by having more than one counselor representing them on council and speaking for them. But the question of whether or not, communities of common interest should be split or not, the statute's clear on that. But does that mean then that renters are better off to be split equally amongst all wards, or some other community of common interest? Democrats, Republicans, what I mean, and is that the outcome of who actually gets elected, or is that how many of those folks are split equally amongst those wards? I think we could twist ourselves in these questions for quite a long while and still end up with very similar lines that are fair. And I want to clear up the record that during the course of this calendar year, there were 2 counselors who were renters for at least 3 months of this year. And for the now 15 years I've served on council, 9 of them I was a renter until April of this year. So, and I was the only one for quite a while. And so I think everybody's comments on where we end up with this are good. And it should, I would be interested in a conversation about the nature of what constitutes appropriate representation, whether or not, those communities should be split or should not be split, and for what reasons. Again, the statute says they should not be. And I think if we identified all the communities of common interest and tried to group them as the statute requires, we'd be in an interesting meeting that would last a lot longer than one night. So thank you very much. And again, Jason, I think you've done a wonderful job of this. The county's maps are all over the place. And I think our process was considerably less controversial. I like it.
Thank you. Jennifer and then Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say I really appreciated everyone's comments tonight. I always tell folks that this is a team effort, and I really appreciate hearing what people said tonight. I think folks are right. I think we're not ready to be making these big decisions because I'm not even sure we all see the same problems. And it's a lot more than just renters. And if we're trying to solve for diversifying council, I'm not sure ward boundaries are the best way to do that. I mean, there's lots of issues and time commitment and all those things that might be a better way to solve that. So I am on board with making this a longer term issue that we can do a better job of in the end. Personally, I kind of like map 2 a little bit better, but it seems the consensus is 1. So I just want to let people know I'm going to put 1 on the table and then we'll see how that goes.
Okay, thank you. Matt and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Ye. If I had an applause emoji or jazz hands for advancing option 1, I would use it. I forgot to ask Jason, Mayor, and Jason, excuse me for not thanking you right out of the gate before I launched into my diatribe and questions. I appreciate the diligent work and the attention to detail. Thank you for the studious work. The 52% of renters in our community, do 52% of landlords pay the $10 per unit annual fee to benefit the elements, including education and enforcement of the rental housing code program?
Do not have that information at our fingertips. We certainly could find out what the sort of how many property managers are paying that fee, so we can follow up with that information.
Great, thanks. I suspect not. So I would love to hear follow up and perhaps what council can do policy wise to have near 100% compliance of that bare minimum $10 per unit annual fee. I don't think that has been adjusted in a decade plus, almost 20 years when it was last created. Do you have any idea? Does anyone on staff know when it was last adjusted? Councillor Clark does. Mayor, may I ask my colleague with permission?
If Mike has the answer, he can share it.
You're correct. It has never, thank you, Mayor. It has never been adjusted from its creation, but in the first 2 years, it created $300,000 in excess of its need to expend it. And it does, in fact, get to everyone who has a rental door. It's charged per door. We have carried over that extra balance because we didn't need the money. And there was quite an argument about whether or not we should return the money we didn't need back about, I want to say it was about 7 or 8 years ago. It's an interesting question.
Considering council looks a little, thank you, Councilor Clark. Considering council looks a little different than it did 7, 8 years ago, I would be interested, just so you all know, in floating a possible work session or a larger conversation about what we could do with said funds if we had near 100% compliance of paying that rental fee at a time where renters are so in need and evictions are on the rise, and our unhoused population, our most vulnerable community members are most in need. I think it warrants a larger conversation. So look for a work session poll soon. Mayor, I think that's all I have in regards to this issue. Thanks for the dialogue and the conversation.
Okay, thanks. Alan and then Emily.
Yeah, I'm not sure how renter payments relate to ward boundaries, but
they don't, Counselor. They do and they don't, but they don't.
I think in the early days, we didn't have the right mix of programs that we were providing. Now we do, and we're not collecting that surplus. And I think you, Councilor Clark and Councilor Keating, are maybe want to have a work session with different aims at what they want to accomplish. But to Jennifer's point about liking scenario 2 maybe more than scenario 1, my question about them being independent, the 2 maps are identical except for the shift between 2 and 3 and the shift between 4 and 5. And it doesn't matter the other two shifts between 3 and 1 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 are the same. So you could actually do a hybrid of the shift in scenario 1 between 2 and 3 and the shift in scenario 2 from 4 to 5, if that's what you wanted to do, Jennifer. And I think that would, correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney, that would be within keeping of what the public hearing was about. It's still within the context of that. It wouldn't violate what we were trying to do a public hearing about, right?
Yes, and this is something that I want to have Jason speak to. In his presentation, he talked about an ordinance. In fact, this is a resolution. It is done by resolution. So your public hearing, if that is what Jason is proposing and scheduling, that is not your standard charter ordinance public hearing that you all are used to. It is a public input. It is not your charter required public hearing, unless Jason, I'm misunderstanding.
I believe that is correct. 10 years ago, it was a resolution. So I think that's the case that we're in. And in terms of any public comment that has preceded this moment, that's all informal, as part of just sort of gathering community input on the process. Any future input would be based specifically on the map you direct staff to prepare for that resolution.
Right. So the motion could be scenario 1 with shift between wards 5 and 4 from scenario 2, correct?
That is correct. Option 2 in the AIS was sort of designed to allow for that.
Right. Okay. So if I don't have a dog in that fight. So if that's what Jennifer and Mike both feel is their preference, then I would suggest we do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, great. Emily.
Thank you. That was basically my question. Since I'm not in either of those choices, I don't know which way to vote. So thanks for figuring that out. And Councilor Keating, we have a session from the Housing Policy Board on renter protections, and I think that you may be pleased with some of the recommendations that are coming forward from that board. So hang on. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that reminder, Emily. Okay, Jennifer, I think you've gotten plenty of input, so you have a customized a motion to put on the table?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I move to direct the city manager to prepare a resolution and map to adopt scenario 1 with ward changes for wards 4 and 5 based on scenario 2 as Eugene's new ward boundaries.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. It was a very good conversation. Thank you all. And you have got a few extra minutes for your break, and I'll see you back here at 7:30.